Hey there, my fellow crime junkies. Welcome back to Sweet Tea and Crime. How was y'all's Thanksgiving? Mine was wonderful. I got to spend lots of time with family, which is always nice. I have so much to be thankful for, including all of my new friends who tune in to listen to me go on and on about criminals. I'm so appreciative of each and every one of you. So, tonight's episode is going to be a short one. I decided to keep this week short and sweet so I didn't have to spend so much of the Thanksgiving holiday preparing. I wanted to really just be present in the moment, and I'm sure y'all will completely understand that. Y'all are great, so I know you will. Honestly, this episode is probably going to be kind of new to me all over again because I started working on it right before the holiday and I feel like some of it's just completely left my brain. Regardless, we gonna get it. Buckle in and ride through it with me, y'all. Alright, so this case was kind of all over the place, which we'll get into. But since this dude was born in West Virginia, I'm going to give y'all some little facts about West Virginia to start us off. The first rural free mail delivery began in Charlestown in 1896. The first official Mother's Day celebration took place in Grafton in 1908. In 2014, West Virginia elected the youngest state lawmaker in the U.S., who was 18 years old. Can y'all imagine an 18-year-old being a lawmaker? I was crazy at 18, so I know I couldn't have. Approximately 75% of West Virginia is covered in forest, making it the third most forested state in the nation. The pawpaw fruit is native to the state and is nicknamed the West Virginia banana. What is a pawpaw fruit? I ain't never even heard of that. Maybe I'm tripping. I'm gonna have to look at. I should have looked it up honestly, but I didn't. So today we're gonna be talking about John Brennan Crutchley. He was a convicted kidnapper and rapist. He's a suspected serial killer and potentially murdered up to 30 women. Crutchley was called the Vampire Rapist because he drained the blood of one of his confirmed victims almost to the point of death. That's crazy. So let's get into like a little bit of background there. So John Crutchley was the youngest of three children. He was born October 1st, 1946 to an affluent family in Clarksburg, West Virginia. His parents were William Bill Crutchley Sr. and Mildred Burnside. His mama was distraught over the loss of her oldest daughter, Donna June Crutchley, who had died during emergency surgery the year before John was born. When John was born, his mama was disappointed that he was a boy because she had wanted to have another daughter. I don't know if that was to like replace the daughter she had lost in a sense, but regardless, she was disappointed that he was a boy. So she started dressing him as a girl for the first 6 years of his life, did not give this child the choice or anything. Not only was he forced to wear dresses, but he was subjected to severe child abuse, which included being beaten until he was, knocked out. He had lost consciousness. Growing up, he didn't have any friends. He spent most of his time tinkering with like electronics, gadgets, things like that in the basement of their home. He graduated high school and went on to graduate with a I can't even talk, Bachelor of Science degree in physics from Defiance College in Ohio in 1970. And then he got his master's in engineering in George Washington University in Washington, D.C. He married his first wife in 1969. Crutchley's first marriage first started becoming strained by the time he had graduated from college. It had pretty much ended by the time he moved to Kokomo, Indiana to work at Delco Electronics. Crutchley had previously worked at General Motors in Ohio, and he was the guy that would go in and install the plant security system. He transferred to Delco Electronics in Kokomo and worked there several years as an electrical systems engineer. Crutchley left Kokomo after an investigation was made by plant security into some missing materials. He later moved to Fairfax County, Virginia, and he did remarry in the mid 1970s. He worked for several high-tech firms in Washington, D.C., including TRW, ICA, and Logicon Process Systems. Crutchley moved to Florida and started working at Harris Corporation in Palm Bay in 1983. At the time of his arrest, Crutchley was found to be in possession of a great deal of highly classified. Let me just get myself together. He had a great deal of highly classified information regarding naval weaponry and communications. The FBI, CIA, and Naval Intelligence considered opening an espionage case against him, but they never did. So let's talk about some things that happened, some things that he did, okay? November 22nd, 1985, in Malabar, Florida, a new teenage girl, later identified as 19-year-old Laura Murphy, was found crawling along the side of the road with her feet and ankles handcuffed. Bless her heart. She had been passed by several trucks before someone finally stopped to help her. And when they did pull over to help her, she went to begging them not to take her back to that house, as she put it. When the guy asked her where it was, she told him that she couldn't remember like a certain house. So anyway, he did take note of like the location and like the general area. He took her home and called for police and an ambulance. The hospital did an assessment of Laura and determined that she was missing between 40 to 45% of her blood, and she had ligature marks on her neck. What the what? Y'all, come on now. This man thought he was a vampire. Okay. Crazy, don't even begin to explain that. She had been hitchhiking the day before on November 21st, and she claimed that Crutchley had picked her up and was willing to take her to where she needed to go, which was the nearby city of Melbourne, Florida, but told her that he had to stop off at home to pick up a notebook that he needed for work. Once they got into his driveway, Crutchley invited her in, but she was like, no thanks. Like, she declined. She didn't want to go in with him. He then tied something around her neck, choked her into unconsciousness, and dragged her into the house. He wasn't giving her a choice. He took off all of her clothes and strapped her to his kitchen counter. Laura woke up to find that she had been tied to that countertop and her arms and legs were completely immobilized. There was a video camera that had been set up with some lights, and just some like tech equipment and things, presumably so that he could watch the footage later to relive the attack. Crutchley raped her and inserted needles into her arm and wrist and carefully extracted her blood. And then he started to drink it, telling her that he was a vampire. This lunatic really thought he was a vampire. Afterward, he handcuffed her and put her in the bathtub, and then came back later for another round of sexual assault and blood extraction. So he put her through it. Bless her heart. Bless her heart. The following morning, after a third round, Crutchley handcuffed Laura and left her in the bathroom, saying that he'd be back later for more. He did tell her that if she tried to escape, his brother would come in and kill her. After Crutchley had left the house, she was able to push out the bathroom window and crawl to the road. Can you imagine how like terrifying that was? And I can't even begin to fathom how terrified she was. A hematologist had later said that she would have died of blood loss within 12 hours if she had not been able to get help. So she was incredibly lucky that she was able to escape. And how strong of her to be able to force herself up. Think of that amount of blood loss and how exhausted she probably was and was still able to, break out. Laura was initially too traumatized to file charges against Crutchley, but a rape counselor was eventually able to persuade her to do it by explaining that if Crutchley was found guilty, it would help stop him from being able to hurt anybody else. So a search warrant was served for Crutchley, and his wife and child were away for Thanksgiving, visiting family in Maryland. When they did go and, served that search warrant, the videotape and the camera had been partially erased, which, according to the victim, would have contained footage of her rape and extraction of the blood. He had deleted that part. Crutchley was arrested during the search, which took place at 2:30 a.m. that day. Photographs of the house were taken at the time that it was first searched. They also took like credit cards, so many credit cards that they were stacked up and they were several inches thick. And then just some miscellaneous items that they did take during that search. A later search did not turn up the credit cards nor a collection of women's I'm sorry, let me back up. A later search turned up the credit cards and a collection of women's necklaces and multiple locks of hair concealed in a closet, which had been noted but not confiscated by the police during the first search. So let me back up on my sentence because I worded that weird. So when they had noted it during the first search, but when they went back to do the second search, that was nowhere to be found. So he got rid of it, is what he did. During the second search in relation to the Malabar case, police discovered a stack of 72 index cards on which Crutchley had recorded the names of multiple women and some men, along with their described sexual performances. When contacted, some of the partners indicated that he had crossed the line from kinky consensual acts into sexual assaults involving restraints. Crutchley's wife had apparently cooperated in similar acts, and spoke to the press about him. Among other remarks, she commented on his attack of the handcuffed teen, calling it, and I quote, a gentle rape devoid of any overt brutality. Excuse me? What the actual holy fuck? No, ma'am, you are not sitting here and downplaying that. She's just as crazy as he is. Shit. When authorities searched Crutchley's office, they found a number of sexually explicit photographs of an unidentified woman tied up and gagged, with Crutchley choking the woman with his hands. They also found homemade sex tapes of Crutchley and his wife and dozens of photographs of women in public places. So he was just a freak. That's wild. In June of 1986, Crutchley pled guilty on kidnapping and rape charges in exchange for prosecutors dropping the grievous bodily harm charge from extracting the victim's blood and for drug possession. During the sentencing phase, the blood issue came up nonetheless, and Crutchley claimed to have been introduced to blood drinking by a nurse as part of a sexual ritual in 1970. Crutchley asked that the blood drinking not be considered in his sentencing because in this case he had not actually drank the blood. He claimed that it had coagulated before he could drink it, saying that he couldn't get it down, as, direct quote there. Crutchley's wife did not take the stand, but told reporters that her husband was not guilty and was just a, quote unquote, a kinky sort of guy. So she needed some mental help too, okay? Based on testimony at the sentencing hearing, the judge chose to exceed state guidelines and sentenced Crutchley to 25 years to life in prison with 50 years of subsequent parole. So let's discuss his suspected victims. FBI profiler Robert Ressler was convinced that Crutchley had almost certainly killed before, and that he had identified him as a serial killer of the organized type. Ressler instigated I will get it together at some point, y'all, I promise. He instigated the second search, so he's the one that got that put into place. And that second search was of a wider scope and detail than the first one was. He did note that several female bodies had been found in Brevard County, I'm not exactly sure how you say that, in previous years, and that the other bodies had been found and women had been reported missing in Pennsylvania while Crutchley had lived there. No evidence was found to link these deaths to Crutchley. Authorities believe that he may have killed women in Virginia, Maryland, Ohio, Washington, D.C., and Brevard County, Florida. So he was just all over the place. On January 28th, 1978, Deborah Fitzjohn, a 25-year-old secretary from Fairfax, Virginia, had disappeared. Crutchley was placed under a close scrutiny because he was Fitzjohn's boyfriend, and she was last seen alive at the trailer park where he lived at Waples Mobile Home Estates. So, yeah, of course he was a suspect. It would be silly if he wasn't. He was questioned several times for his possible involvement in her disappearance. He did claim that Deborah had visited him the night before she vanished, but he fell asleep in front of the television and said that when he woke up, she had left. I find that hard to believe. Fitzjohn's skeletal remains were found by a hunter in October the following year. And then when Crutchley was arrested in November of 85, investigators said they found the business card of the chief investigator of the Fitzjohn case among Crutchley's possessions. And then there was Patty Lou Valansky. Patty was a 29-year-old who was last seen by her roommate around or between 4:30 and 5:30 p.m. on March 15th, 1985, when Valansky had decided to hitchhike and left her Memphis, Florida resident on foot. She has not been seen since. Crutchley is considered to be a suspect in Patty's case as well. When Crutchley's workplace was searched, Patty's photo ID was discovered, and he did acknowledge that he had picked her up hitchhiking about 6 months before his arrest in November of 85. Crutchley claimed that he ordered Patty out of his car after she had started making obnoxious demands, as he put it. The following day, he found her ID on the seat of his car and took him to his office. Her body was never found. In addition to Patty, the IDs of 5 other women were found in Crutchley's work desk. One of the IDs belonged to Nancy K. Brown, a 25-year-old native of Rantoul, Illinois, who had disappeared while vacationing in Cocoa Beach, Florida on June 6 of 1983. Her remains were discovered in Canaveral Groves on March 8th of 84. She had passed away from a blow to the head, so she was obviously killed. On May 1st, 1984, boaters had found the body of a female floating in a creek north of the barge canal on Merritt Island. She was later identified as 16-year-old Cheryl Ann Windsor, who had been reported missing by her mom on April 7th of 84. Her ID was found as well in his belongings. The ID of 20-year-old Diane Lee Casey, whose skeletal remains were also found on Merritt Island in 84, was also found in his office. 23 bone fragments believed to be the partial remains of 2 women who were found in dense brush south of U.S. Route 1 in Malabar, Florida on January 30th of 1985. They were found. Some of the bones were identified as the remains of Kimberly Ann Walker, age 21, of Vero Beach, Florida. Bone from the pelvis, leg, and foot belonged to a still unidentified woman. So we aren't sure who she was. In both cases, the exact cause of death was unknown. Walker was last seen June of 84 getting into a light-colored small car at a Myco convenience store. Crutchley owned a beige 1982 Nissan Stanza. So tell me that isn't who did that. Come on now, let's be real. The decomposing and bludgeoned body of Lynn K. DeSantis, age 40, was found in a ditch in Grant, Florida on November 26, 1985. She was last seen hitchhiking outside the Colonial Motel where she lived in Melbourne, Florida. Her death was ruled a homicide. In 1995, Naval Criminal Investigation Services agents began to investigate Crutchley, since he had access to the Norfolk Naval Air Station during the time 2 women were murdered at the base. They did a lot of looking into this man and not enough arresting. Pamela Ann Kimbrough, a 23-year-old Navy messenger, disappeared from the base on March 25th of 1982. Later, at the end of the seaplane ramp, her body was discovered floating in her submerged vehicle. Her assailant attempted to choke her while tying her arms behind her with a clothesline. Carol Ann Molnar, a 21-year-old Navy clerk, disappeared on February 6, 1983. 3 months later, at the Norfolk base, her decomposing body was discovered partially buried beneath rocks of a seawall. She had been choked to death. Following their investigation, a man was sentenced in 1997 to 2 life terms in prison for the slaying of Kimberly. Molnar's murder has not been solved. In 2010, the Brevard County Sheriff's Office released an image of a school reconstruction based on the remains of an unidentified woman known only as the Brevard County Doe. Teen hunters found the victim's remains in a densely wooded area off of Hollywood Boulevard in West Melbourne, Florida, on December 15th, 1985, not far from Crutchley's home. So, I mean, you put the pieces together, the pieces fit, and they make the puzzle, which points to Crutchley. Ressler had predicted that Crutchley's 25 to life sentence would result in release as soon as 1998, but Crutchley was actually released 2 years earlier than that. He was released on August 8th of 96 after serving 11 years of his sentence. He was released on good behavior. They should have kept that sucker locked up. Officials in Bridgeport, West Virginia, where his mother lived, did not want him there, and neither did the authorities in Malabar or Melbourne. So Crutchley was transferred to the Orlando Probation and Restitution Center, which was a halfway house. Less than a day later, Crutchley was arrested for violating his parole after testing positive for marijuana. Let me say it right. Marijuana. He claimed that inmates had blown the marijuana in his face and that he had not smoked it. Lies. I call bullshittery. Prosecutors in the trial showed him confessing to a corrections inspector that he had smoked the substance because he was nervous about his impending release and he wanted it to relax him. And then he gonna try to go back and say he didn't. Lies. The violation of his parole resulted in a sentence of life imprisonment to be imposed on January 31st of 97 under the Three Strikes Law. This was his third conviction. The first two were for the kidnapping and rape of the Malabar hitchhiker. Crutchley was placed in solitary confinement, which is where it was discovered that he had 13 body piercings on his genitals, which was also a violation of prison rules. On March 30th of 2002, Crutchley died in prison. Hallelujah. Corrections officials reported on April 2nd of 2002 that he had been found dead in his cell at the Hardy Correctional Institution with a plastic bag over his head. But the cause of death reported was asphyxiation. August 1st of 2003, from the Florida Department of Corrections, declared that Crutchley died of autoerotic asphyxiation. Why does that not surprise me, y'all? This fellow was clearly insane. Honestly, there isn't too much to say here, considering the facts said it all for us. This guy had major issues, and so did his wife. It's so heartbreaking for the victims, especially, the unidentified, and just what he put these poor women through, and taking their lives. It's just awful. Well, I am going to go ahead and wrap this one up. Thank y'all so much for joining me on another episode of Sweet Tea and Crime. Next week, we are going to have us a nice juicy case to explore. So make sure you don't miss it, alright? I'm your host, Josie, signing off for the night. Sweet dreams.